welcome to the second lecture in the digestive system where we introduced it last time, and now we're going to talk about specific parts of the digestive system, beginning with the mouth. The mouth is part of the alimentary canal. That's that long tube that spans from your lips all the way to the other end. And so if we think about the alimentary canal in that sense, nothing really gets into the body until it passes through that layer of epithelium of the alimentary canal. And in order to get those molecules broken down into their monomers so they can get into the body, that's going to begin in the mouth. The mouth is also known as the oral cavity or the buccal cavity. And the lips, those are part of the mouth, but they are not part of the oral cavity. So there is that distinction there. The mouth is going to function for the intake of food, so ingestion, and it's also going to have a lot of receptors in the tissue. So there are mechanoreceptors that can detect texture, and there are chemoreceptors that can detect chemicals and provide taste. And there are even thermoreceptors that can detect hot and cold. So we can have these sensory responses to our food. The mouth is also going to be the site where we have the breakdown and digestion of food begin. We'll have mechanical breakdown by chewing, and we'll start to have chemical breakdown by some amylase and other enzymes that we find in the saliva. If we look at the tissue of the mouth, we have to dig way back to our tissues and integumentary system in 201. So if we look at that tissue, it is a stratified squamous epithelium that's going to line the mouth. And if we recall, stratified squamous epithelium function is for protection. So also back in 201, you learned about this process called keratinization. And so in the integumentary system, we learned about how cells in the basale layer, the deepest part of the epidermis, they get kind of pushed up to those more superficial layers. And as they get pushed up towards the surface of the skin, they begin to fill with keratin. And that process is called keratinization. And keratin is a protein that's very tough, and it provides waterproofing of the skin, and it helps harden the skin, and it has the same function in the mouth. So the areas in our mouth where there is a lot of food abrasion, like in the gums and along the hard palate, along the roof of the mouth, that epithelial tissue will be keratinized. While other areas where there's not so much food abrasion, like the floor of the mouth and the soft palate and the insides of the cheeks and lips, the tissue there will not be keratinized. The anatomy of the oral cavity. We have the lips, which are referred to as the labia. So on like a practical, if you have to identify that structure, that's the term that we would use here. And then we have the cheeks that are going to form the lateral walls. If you look just posterior to the teeth, we have the hard palate, and that's going to be demonstrated by that palatine rugae. And this hard palate is actually the maxilla bone and the palatine bone. That's going to form the anterior roof of the mouth. And then posterior to that, we're going to have the soft palate. And hanging off of the soft palate, we're going to have the uvula, which is that fleshy projection. And that is actually something that will block passages to the nasal cavity while swallowing. So this is a cross-section image, and you can see here you have the labia, and then that space in between, sorry, I thought I had my laser, so the labia, and this space right here in between the lips and the teeth, that is called the vestibule. And then here we can see the bone, which is the hard palate. And then you can see that soft palate, which is soft tissue, and the uvula that is hanging down. And then you can note the palatine tonsil here that is located posteriorly here within the oropharynx region. And then also note here, this is the tongue. This whole muscle, your tongue is a huge muscle, and it has an attachment point of the hyoid bone, which is here. And then you can see some other tonsils. You have the lingual tonsil that's going to be underneath the tongue there. The cheeks and lips are going to help retain food and push it between the teeth, so that way mechanical breakdown of the food can occur. The cheeks and lips are also essential for speech, for the production of sucking and blowing, and there's going to be some structures within the cheeks and lips. So here's another picture of that vestibule that I showed you in the last slide, but I like this one because you can see that it's the space right here that's all in black. And then there is going to be this median fold that will attach each lip to the gum in between the anterior incisors. And so that is called a frenulum. So you have these labial frenulums here. You can see it right there. And that's going to attach the lip to the gum. Tongue is a very, very large and bulky muscle that's remarkably agile, and it's highly sensitive. It has a lot of receptors in it. It is very strong, and it manipulates the food between your teeth. The tissue that the tongue is made up of is a muscular tissue, but it's going to be covered by a stratified squamous epithelium, and that is non-keratinized. And then we're going to see these little bumps all over the tongue. Those are papillae, specifically lingual papillae. And that's going to be the site of most of our taste buds. So the papillae and taste buds are different. A papillae will have many taste buds on it. So each bump has lots and lots of taste buds. And then we have our lingual tonsils. That's going to be contained here in the root of the tongue. And you cannot see this portion of the tongue. Tongue will be connected to the floor of the mouth by a frenulum called the lingual frenulum. So this will be that medium fold there. And there are some intrinsic muscles that are contained entirely within the tongue, and those are muscles that will produce more subtle movements for like speech. And then you have some other muscles that are going to have origins elsewhere, and they insert into the tongue, and those are going to produce stronger motions or movements of food manipulation. See that lingual frenulum, and this is an image of somebody who is tongue-tied. So that lingual frenulum is misshapen, and it's attaching too much of that tongue to the floor. What is going to separate the oral cavity from the nasal cavity is the palate. And so we have the soft palate and we have the hard palate. And this palate makes it possible to breathe while you're chewing food. So you can see the nasal cavity here, and then this is the part of the pharynx that is the superior most portion by the nasal cavity. So this portion of the pharynx or back of the throat is called the nasopharynx. And then you can see that hard palate, which is the palatine bone and the maxilla bone. And then you can see the soft palate here. And then the palatine tonsils will be located posteriorly to the soft palate and to the uvula. So the soft palate will have more of a spongy texture. It's going to be composed of skeletal muscle and glandular tissue. And then the uvula is going to hang off of that soft palate. It will be found medially and visible at the rear of the mouth. And when you swallow, that uvula will fold up here and will close off this point of entry into the nasopharynx. And it will also help hold food in the mouth until it is ready to be swallowed. So here we have just that picture of the mouth, and you can see the hard palate that forms the bony roof of the mouth. The rest of the mouth is referenced as the soft palate, and then we have the uvula and the tongue. Here is the picture from your book. You can notice that the hard palate is going to be visible with those rugae or ridges. And then you have the soft palate and the uvula hanging off of that soft palate. You can also see the palatine tonsils. You can see the frenulum, and then you can even see the labial frenulum and the vestibule. Here we have the palate and the palatine tonsils. So you can see the hard palate would be here in a cadaver. This area is the soft, and then the portion hanging off of the soft would be the uvula. And then you can see the nasopharynx here. And then this portion would be the oropharynx. So when you swallow food, that uvula will close off, blocking that passage. And then make a note of the palatine tonsil here. Within the mouth, there are some accessory organs, like the teeth, and the function of the teeth is for chewing, and we call chewing mastication. This is going to make food easier to swallow, and it's going to start the physical or mechanical breakdown of food. And as we're chewing, that's going to increase the surface area of the food to come in contact with digestive enzymes. And you won't be asked a ton about teeth, but we will go over the teeth. So humans have two sets of teeth. Baby teeth or primary teeth are deciduous teeth, and then we have our permanent or secondary teeth. Humans have two sets of teeth, and deciduous teeth, there are 20 that are fully formed by the age of 2 to 4. Permanent teeth will replace the deciduous teeth between the ages of 6 to 12. A full set is 32 teeth, but some people do not have wisdom teeth. Actually, my oldest daughter, she does not have wisdom teeth. And so some people don't have those. We're finding more children are being born without those. And those wisdom teeth are often referred to as the third molars. So going from the midline to the rear of each jaw, remember human or adults will have 32 teeth. And so these first two teeth here are the incisors. And those are going to be used for cutting pieces of food. And then there is one canine. Those are also called cuspids. Those are used to tear and pierce. So these, if you think about like a canine, a dog, these are those really long teeth on the sides of their mouth, but towards the front. And then we have our premolars, which are called bicuspids. These are going to be used for crushing, shredding, and grinding. And then we have 3 molars or tricuspids that are broader and have more surface area for crushing, shredding, and grinding. And so there are going to be 16 total in the mandible and 16 in the maxilla bone. Deciduous teeth and permanent teeth are growing within the maxilla and the mandible. So baby skulls actually look kind of freaky. So there are the deciduous teeth, and then within the bones, you have the development of those permanent teeth, and they start to push themselves up through the bones and the gums, which is why teething is painful. So here is a skull of showing primary teeth and showing some of those secondary teeth. And these pockets where the teeth grow actually help form your sinuses. So I will not ask you about the age of eruption, but it is in our curriculum. So typically these two bottom teeth are, those are usually coming in about 6 to like 8 to 9 months. The incisors are going to come in at 7 to 9 months. And then we have the canines, the molars, and the second molars will come in much later. And then sometimes we have the third molar that comes in. This is an x-ray showing that third molar. Some people have no problem with these wisdom teeth that are coming in, but some people have narrow jaws and there's just simply no room. So they come in and it starts to squish the other teeth. And that can cause shifting, and sometimes they don't come in right either. For example, I've got terrible wisdom teeth. One of mine is actually coming out of the side of my gums instead of down behind the other teeth. And so sometimes what can happen too is these bones, or these teeth, they don't fully come out. They become impacted. And impacted means that it's totally under the bone. It can be very, very painful and has to be removed surgically. So if we look at the anatomy of a tooth, the part that you can see is called the crown. And that is covered by what's called enamel. And there we go. And enamel is the hardest substance in the body. Yes, it is harder than bone. And then the part that you cannot see that's embedded in the root gum is called the root. And inside the root, you're going to find the root canal that contains the nerves, the blood vessels, and if you look down to where it says, cementum, this substance helps cement the tooth into place. So it's kind of an easier way to remember that name. And then if you happen to have an infection or a cavity get through that enamel and into this root where those nerves are, it can be very painful and you're going to need a root canal. So a root canal is where the pulp cavity extends into the root, and you end up having to remove that entire root. So here's just for you, so you can have it in your notes. What the neck is, that's the region that comes into contact with the gum. It connects the crown to the root, and that's where we're going to find that cementum within the root. So that's going to cover the outer surface, and it's going to connect the tooth to the periodontal membrane. So here we have an x-ray picture of a real tooth, and just take note of that periodontal ligament here. And so if you go ahead and if you swallow, you'll notice that the first thing you do is you lift your tongue. So lifting your tongue is actually what initiates the swallowing reflex. So when we are chewing, that chewing process is called mastication. And that mastication is going to mix the food with the saliva. And this was also going to allow for our sense of taste. Mastication is going to break food down into smaller pieces to be swallowed, and it's going to allow more surface to be exposed to those digestive enzymes that are in the mouth. This is the first step of mechanical digestion. And we're also going to have receptors within the mouth that are involuntary, and the chewing reflex begins. So the tongue is a muscle involved. The buccinator muscle is also involved, and also the orbicularis oris, that's the circular muscle around your mouth, that's all going to be used to manipulate food. And then you have some synergist muscles in mastication. There is the masseter muscle and there is the temporalis muscle that will elevate the lower teeth to help crush the food. And then you have the pterygoids and the masseters that can swing side to side to help kind of grind up the food more. Here are those muscles of mastication in a cadaver. So just another reminder way back from 201. There's your temporalis. This muscle here is the masseter muscle. And then you have the pterygoids. You have the lateral and then the medial. There are some other structures that are secondary structures other than the teeth that we're going to find in the mouth, and those are our salivary glands. Those glands are going to produce your saliva, and that saliva is a hypotonic solution, so that means that there is less solute in the solution than there is in the cells within our mouth. So there's about 97 to 99.5% water. And then the solutes are going to include some electrolytes. It's going to include immunoglobulins, those antibodies that will inhibit bacterial growth. So if we recall from the lymphatic system, that would be IgA. And then there's going to be some enzymes that help start to break down the food, like amylase. So there is salivary amylase, which will break starch down into its individual monomer of glucose. And then there is a lingual lipase. So this is an enzyme that will start to break down fat. Once we swallow it, it will be activated in the stomach. And then there is also going to be some mucus that's in there to help kind of lubricate the food when you swallow. And then there is an enzyme that is called lysozyme that kills bacteria. So we have a little bit of innate defense, before we even swallow our food. And the pH of our saliva is slightly acidic at about 6.8. Looking at the salivary glands, there are actually two types of salivary glands. There are extrinsic salivary glands that produce a bulk of your spit. So there are 3 pairs of these that are connected to the oral cavity by ducts. So the first is the parotoid. This salivary gland is located beneath the skin, and it's anterior to the earlobe. So you can see the earlobe here, and it's as if we were to just move that skin back. Mumps is an inflammation and swelling of this gland that is caused by a virus. And then if you look underneath the mandible, you have the submandibular gland that's going to be located about halfway along the body of the mandible. And the duct is going to empty to each side of the lingual frenulum. So it's going to be kind of near those central incisors on the lower jaw. And then if we look right below the tongue, there is the sublingual gland that's located in the floor of the mouth, and that's going to have many ducts that empty posteriorly to the pupilla of the submandibular duct. I like this picture because it shows how there's those many ducts here in the submandibular gland. I'm sorry, the sublingual gland. There's all those ducts. Here are those salivary glands in a cadaver. And if we dig way back to what we learned in 201, we learned about tissues and we learned about the histology of tissues. So if we look at the histology of salivary glands, these glands are exocrine glands, which means they secrete their substances into a duct. And specifically, these are compound tubuloacinar glands. So because they're compound, it means that they have a lot of ducts. And because they're tubular acinar, that means that the end of the tube will end in this kind of bulb. And that bulb is called an acinius. So depending on the type of cells that are at the end of this bulb, that determines what type of acinius it is. So you have a mucus acinius, we'll have serous acinius, or you can have a mixed acinius. The mucus cells in a mucus acinius will secrete mucus, while serous cells in a serous acinius will secrete a fluid that's very thin and it has a lot of enzymes and electrolytes in it. And then we have the mixed acinius that's going to have both. And at the very end of these acinius, we're actually going to have a layer of muscle cells. It's called myoepithelium. And those muscles will contract and it will squeeze these serous cells. And it will, as it squeezes it, it will push their serous fluid into the duct. And so if we look at the histology of the gland, we can see these, like, look for the donuts, right, where I see the donuts. Those are going to be the mucus cells is the easiest way. They seem to have that simple cuboidal epithelium, and they're got their duct. While we see this like cluster of cells here, those are the acinius cells. And those are going to be the ones to, they are the serous acini, so the serous cells that are secreting that thin fluid. Those are here. And then we have some intrinsic salivary glands. So these aren't going to produce the quantity, but these are very small glands that are dispersed all throughout the oral cavity. And they constantly secrete just a little bit of saliva to help moisten your mouth when you're not eating. And these are, the saliva contains lingual lipase, so lipase that will break down fat, and lysozymes that will protect from bacteria. So then we have the process of salivation. So salivation is going to be controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system, and it can be produced by a lot of different stimuli. Just feeling food in the mouth can cause us to salivate. The flavor of the food, even just smelling, seeing, or thinking about food can make us salivate. Or if there's any kind of irritant, like in your pharynx or your esophagus or even in your stomach, this saliva can dilute and wash away whatever substance is causing that irritation. We're going to end it here. We will talk about another structure in the next lesson.